Veteran Kennedy assassination researchers know a roster of issues that come up in the sidelines of extensive reading to understand. For example, Charles Cabal's relationship with the city of Dallas and JFK history has raised questions to ascertain whether or not there was a feud coming from the city of Dallas, particularly directed at Kennedy over things like the oil depletion alliance, whether Nelson Bunker Hunt was the Hunt referred to in an Oswald note to Mr. Hunt, and or alternately E. Howard Hunt, the Watergate burglar, because Frank Sturgis is named in many of the classified documents that have recently been released. He was Watergate burglar and a anti-Cuban mercenary. So the question of whether Kennedy rigged the election in West Virginia comes up. I think that if the election was rigged, it was by Kennedy's rivals in the Republican Party because they needed him to be in place on November 22nd, 1963. They already knew what they were going to do and hired him for a role in which he was executed. And being for the benefit of Mr. K, the lastly through a hogshead of real fire is a direct allusion to the perpetrators, a direct allusion made by the perpetrators, who then followed up by pretending that they too were victims so that they could transform the status of the victims into scapegoats. If you look at the situation in Dallas, you see if there was a feud at work, it was a sort of international political feud that goes on where animosity prevents magnanimity towards people who defeated you in an election. Kennedy understood the need for magnanimity in the democratic process. When he first lost an election, he was gracious, and this elevated his stock against the Republicans. Such graciousness did not exist in the Ukraine. It did not exist in Venezuela, and it did not exist in Republican politics of the Reagan brand. Once they lost, they went to covert action. What we see in the questions of the methods that they used is a language stunt, among other things. The Wizard of Oz was a book that was said to be a parable about Congress in Washington, D.C. by Frank Baum. Emerald City was like the Beltway, the Capitol Hill at the end of the Beltway. And so Oswald is the taking of Tiger Mountain for the Republican riffraff apparatus who wanted final jurisdiction established forever. And this language system also comes out in once you realize there is a language system at work, you get to the phenomenon, for example, of the use of Casper for the friendly ghost of Hitler in Mendoza, Argentina. So there are language stunts that they pull throughout the craftsmanship of the execution of JFK. When I was growing up in the city of Pittsburgh, someone spray painted in 1966, I love Sira Sirhan. I'll spell how it's spelled, Sirasan, on garage door before which I was photographed. The picture is Kodak dated 1966, and a nerve agent was used on me. So it's relevant that there were um, dramatic stage props all around me. Marlborough Road, there was a man who said I walked hunched over and didn't have firm shoulders. There's a man who used to holler drunken at the top of his lungs at his wife. There was a Siamese cat that was so mean it died in the snow. When you look into the particulars of the stage props that were used, it's important to understand that stage props were used and that some of them might have significance. Certainly the name Oswald probably has significance in the way that it echoes the Wizard of Oz. When you look at the way that Midori Goto finagled with Donald Trump in the Two Virgins Pussy Bowl operation that left my father dead at the hands of the German Green Party, apparently with the help of Seattle's Confederacy of casino and NAACP advocates. You have a situation where you show the duplicity that's emotionally intelligent in the sense of artificial intelligence tinkering with human sensibility caused by Leonard Sudini. I reached out to Midori Goto. There was a wall of sound put up by Leslie Katz's lesbian cheering section coming from Yoko Ono's New York, mostly Jewish rivals in the academic scene. And Midori Goto harvested that rejectionism in order to basically tear my head off for Donald Trump. But simultaneously, they played this game of making it look like Donald Trump was going to kidnap Midori, and make her satisfy his sexual sadism as penitence for my being seduced by one of their hotties provided by Peter Gabriel. And this was possible for a while manipulativenessly for a while in causing me to believe Midori Goto was under attack. That's why she ended up with the original papers at International Creative Management. And I wrote to a New York Deaf School asking them to please look into whether she was being attacked. They were putting on show with the help of Scorsese. It reminds me of Kyra Schoen. He used to sit on the steps outside my house, tearing fabric and then wailing, screaming. And the girls would laugh and laugh. Then they'd tear fabric and scream, blood-curdling screams. She was an actress for her father, George Romero. This is the way that Neva Corporation worked. Gail Burson's letters say, which a portion of which I managed to secure documentation of. Oh, ain't it weird how, maybe it hasn't occurred to you that women also laugh and cry. Maybe it hasn't occurred to you that Kyra was laughing and screaming at the same time because she was playing an actress. And this is the Hollywood fiction system that Scorsese and Penis Gabriel put together in support of the alibi program defending the people who wrote the script commending and justifying JFK. And there's certain intimacies to thinking processes that came from, for example, Richard Carle, who lived across the street. He seemed capable of this kind of thing. There was an old story that Roosevelt had withheld prior knowledge that Pearl Harbor was going to happen, had allowed it to happen. And this infuriated the people who wanted America on the side of the Germans. So the hookah diagram creates a parallel from the Wizard of Oz program at University of Pittsburgh's Master of All Defense of Donald Trump and David Bowie, if not Master of All Bad Connection. And they said, poof, we're going to make it so that the revenge of the Axis comes on the heels of prior warning on the Japanese anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And they gloated over the irony of this until hell froze over. Brr. So you see the thinking processes were a little bit abstract in some cases. But there's no question that they correlate the shooting of Martin Luther King to Dee Dee's birthday by a factor of 6 years ago and call attention to coincidences. Then by a factor of 6 years to the birthday of Gail Burstyn, John Lennon supposedly was shot. But what we do know is that just as Kennedy had to be elected for them to pull this off, John Lennon would have had to go out that night, because this was a plan of double cross that was 100 years in the making, tracing back to a counterfeiting done in Fayoum from the early age of Mussolini, when Italy and England were allies. The fascism of the Beatles is so prolific that they even named their band after Adolf Hitler's Volkswagen, the Beetle. So the Beatles were part and parcel of this whole thing. They didn't leave it to chance that Lennon would go out any more than they left it to chance that John Kennedy would be elected president and find his way to Dallas on the appointed hour. Lennon participated and made sure that he was at the station for beaming up. George Takei is a central intelligence figure in this whole media wizard room. To evaluate George Takei's considerable pull and influence, you have to understand the gravity of the whole mechanism that they're describing through their symbolic and semiotic investment in the Texas school book. He made Green Berets with John Wayne, who was photographed with Oswald. And Oswald's attorney appears on Star Trek. That was Melvin Belly. He also was the attorney for Herman Goring's widow. And Jack Ruby was represented by Melvin Belly. He also had the same psychiatrist as Charles Manson. Mancine plays a big role in the letters of Gail Burstyn. Mancine is the name of Dee Dee, whom the murder of Martin Luther King is correlated to. So what you see is an alliance of people working with Yoko Ono, killing John Fitzgerald Kennedy and making a storybook. Arnold Katz, Leslie's father, who was a partner of Gail Burstyn, Leslie Katz, used to brag of coming from the same hometown as Rod Serling. So the Twilight Zone aspect of GT, or George Takei, is clear and present throughout the tawdry production system coming from Axis Hollywood.